Okay, we go to the Chumash of the day. Today is Tuesday, the 8th day of Tishrei, and we go to the Chumash of the day, which we're holding in the portion of Hazinu, and that's in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 13. Yakiveyu al bamnasai oretz. He made them ride upon high places. Vayochal tenuva sadai, that they eat the produce of the field. Vayankeu dvash misela, he let them suck honey from a rock. V'shalmem mechal mishtur, and oil from the mighty part of the crag. Rock. Yakivei albam se'ares, Rashi says, the entire verse is to be understood as it's written in the Targum, as the Targum translates the verse. Yakivehu. So now Rashi explains the verse according to the Targum. He made them ride upon high places, referring to the land of Israel, because it's higher than other countries. This does not only mean physically, it means spiritually. And they ate from the produce of the field. These are the fruits of that land of Israel, which are quicker to bud and to ripen than any fruit of any other country. It once happened a place in Israel, in Sichni, that a man said to his son, "Bring me pressed figs from that barrel." When the son went to the barrel, but instead of refining figs, he found honey flowing over its brim. The son said, reported, and the son said that the son retorted and said, "But this is a barrel of honey, not of figs." His father responded, "Dig your hand deep into the barrel, and you'll bring out pressed figs from it. Pressed figs are as hard as rock." Thus, we have an illustration of the land of Israel sucking honey from a rock. That even though the fig was, if it was pressed, it was hard like a rock, it continued to give oil. The shem and machal mishtur, and oil from a mighty part of the crag. This refers to the olives of the place of Gilead called Gilead. Bum se'arash lashon gavaya. Bum, whenever the Torah says a bum, it means an expression of high places. Shadai lashon is an expression of a field. Al mishtur, meaning the hard and stronger part of a rock. You know, that's in English called crag. Rashi now proves that the word chalmish is the construction state, thus rendering the mighty part. So when chalmish is not connected with a word, it follows in the absolute state is vakla chalomish. However, when it's connected to a word that follows chalmish tzur, you say with a patak chalmish. Chemaz baka, verse 14. Chemaz baka v'chelav tzayid, the cream of cattle and the milk of sheep. V'im chelav kravim, with the fat of lambs. Ve'elim, and of lambs and rams. B'nei habashan, of Bashan, Ba'atudim, and he goats. Im chelav klois, with kidney of wheat. Chelav klois chita. With dam ein of tishta, would drink the blood of grapes. Chomer, as fine wine. So Rashi says, Chemes baka v'chelav tzoyin. This took place in the days of Solomon, when Solomon's provision for one day consists of 10 fat cattle, and 20 cattle from the pasture, and 100 sheep. So there was such an abundance. In chelav karim, zevi me esa shvatim, fat of lambs. This took place in the days of the 10 tribes, the period of northern kingdom of Israel. Because they who eat lambs and flocks, they also had an abundance. Chelav klois chita, again, fat kidneys of wheat. This took place in the times of Solomon. As scriptures say, the Solomon provision was one they considered 30 core of fine flour. So there was abundance of wheat in the land of Israel. Bedam Anovim Tishta, and would drink blood of grapes as fine as wine. This took place in the days of the 10 tribes in the period of the northern kingdom of Israel. As it states, they drink wine in wine caskets. So different periods are actually different periods of history that happened, different situations in the land of Israel. The chayil of tzoin, the milk of sheep, the word for milk here is a construct state. Accordingly, when it's connected to the word that follows, the verse says the milk of sheep. Kramim, what's kramim? Lambs. Be'elim, elim is apparent meaning is the concept of rams. B'nei Bashan, from Bashan, because they were very fat, these lambs in Bashan. Kloya schita, wheat as fat kidneys, whose kernels are as large as a kidney. Very, very well done. Dam anav, the grapes of blood of grapes, they would drink good wine. The flavor would be that of wine of high esteem. Chamar, wine in Aramaic. And actually goes and explains it according to grammar. Verse 15. Vayishman Yeshurun, and Yeshurun became fat. Vayishman, they became fat. Vayibat, and they rebelled. Shamanta Visa, you grew fat and thick and round. Kasisa. Vayita Shalahe also, and you forsook God who made them. Vayisnabel to Yeshuasei, and you sprung the mighty rock of their salvation. That said, they grew thick. An expression obvious is the expression of the word oivi, which is thickness. Kasisa is like the word kasisa, covers. This is the same meaning of the verse, for he had covered his face with fat. Like a person who's full of fat inside and who flanks, therefore he has folded fat or fat outside. This is like the continuation of that verse. He made folds of fat upon his flanks. Kasisa, he grew round, rotund. Root of the word kise or kes is all a lashon, takes simple to cover. Became very extremely fat. Covered him around him. But he's navel to Yeshua, he sprung the mighty rock of their salvation. This disgraced and despised him. As the scripture says, about 25 men with their backs towards the Heichal of the Lord. The prophet Ezekiel was shown these treacherous men who had their backs to the temple in the west and were bowing down to the sun in the east. He had shown other abominable acts as well. However, there can be no despicable act more than this, than to the God, to be a kvutay, God to give you such an abundance, and you should use it out to bow down to other, to put your back towards him. Verse 16, you can now bezodim. They provoked his zeal with alien worship. They made him angry with abominable deeds. You can now, so Rashi says, they provoked his anger and his zeal. With abominable deeds, such as homosexuality, sorcery, Rashi says, which is described as a te'eva, an abomination. Verse 17. They sacrifice to demons, which have no power. Deities they did not know. New things that only recently came. Which your forefathers did not fear. Now she says, Tigum rendered which have no power. For if they had power, God's jealousy would have been doubled as it's now, but they have no power. New things that only recently came. These deities were so recent that even the heathen nations are not familiar with them. Indeed, the heathens saw them and they said, this is the Jewish idol. Jews made up this idol. Your fathers did not fear. This means which your forefathers did not fear. For literally, it means the hair, She'er, did not stand up because of these deities. It's the nature of a person here to stand up out of fear. The word She'urim is explained in Sifri. The word She'urim also explained is stemming from the word Se'irim. The Se'irim will dance there, where Se'irim are demons. Thus the verse means your forefathers did not make such demons. Verse 18. Sur Yalat Chateshi. You forgot the mighty rock who bore you. Tishkach el mechelecha. And you forgot the God who delivered you. So Teshi, Teshi means to forget. Our rabbis explain this word homiletically to mean when God comes to be so good upon you, you provoked him to anger and weaken his powers, as it were, to do you good. El mechelecha, the God who delivers you. Rashi says, God who brought you out of the womb. There's the same meaning of the verse. The voice of the Lord makes the hind bring forth the young. So that completes the Chumash of the day. We are holding a long letter of the Alter Rebbe, where the Alter Rebbe is explaining the concept of creation. Yesh li'ayin, something that comes from nothing. It's a very deep letter, and it's going to continue for another couple of days. This letter of the Alter Rebbe, and it's a very important letter to learn. It's a very deep letter, a very Kabbalistic letter, and a lot of concepts of Kabbalah Chassidus are explained in this letter. So let's give the introduction he has over here, because I haven't learned with you in the last 2 days. So as it's been seen, the objective creation of a yesh takes place through the investment of the infinite ayin light in the kalim of all 10 tzilas of Atzilus. So everything starts in the world of Atzilus, as Kabbalah says, Chassidus explains. Everything starts in the world of emanation. And it all starts off with the oilos, with the lights and the vessels of the world of emanation. That means in the world of emanation, where there's oneness, but there's still a concept of oil, of a light and a vessel. As the Alter Rebbe goes now to explain, the subject yeshut of created being, the self-perception as entity distinct and separate from the creator. So where does humanity get this concept of separation? Derives principally from the spheres of Malchus of the world of Atzilus. Where does humans ultimately, everything yesh, as we explained, the most important entity of creation is the yesh, the physical thing, and the physical thing is the only thing in the world that feels its own entity. That it has its own identity. This all comes ultimately from the Eibush himself, who has that yesh in him. And that is expressed in the world of Malchus, in the level of kingship in the world of Atzilus. The very notion of Malchus sovereignty, the Alter Rebbe explaining the meaning of the 10th Sfirah, the attribute of Malchus kingship. Because sovereignty, when somebody says, I am a sovereign, can apply only to individuals who are separate from the king who rules over them, and who nevertheless nullifies their will to him. When I say I'm a melech, when the attribute of kingship says he's a king, and nevertheless he becomes bottled to God, that's unbelievable. So that's why it's interesting. Malchus shows on humility. Malchus, the attribute of kingship, shows you humility. Why would you call something that is a king that shows on separate and rulership to something that's humble? But that's where the greatness of humility is in a king. When a king can be humble, then you know what humility is. That's why it's important to have a king like David HaMelech, who is humble, Well, Moshe Rabbeinu was humble because in one entity he's Malchus, he's a king, and in the other concept he's humble. So there you see the greatness of a king and when he can be humble, because it's totally opposite of what he is. He's a melech, he's a king. This is the interesting thing. So therefore, keeping with the axiom, there's no king without a nation. So the king knows that he needs a nation. A king knows he needs a nation, because without a nation, he's not a king. The Hebrew word of am is etymologically related to the word oimimut, as an expression. Gacholim oimimut signifies embers whose fire's been dimmed. It's like a flood. It's like taking a coal and starting to die out. It's called oimimut. It starts to simmer out. In this spirit, am implies to a populace which is far removed from the king's qualities and from his company. By contrast, so he's like a dying out coal. By contrast, in the head closest of a father to a child makes it impossible for the father to reign over his child. Sovereignty is possible only over strangers, over those who are distant. Ein melech b'lo am. If a king has 100,000 children, they're not a nation. He's not a king. You're not a king over your children. You're a king over somebody else. That's called kingship. Ein melech b'lo am, which means ultimately you're not a king without, you don't have somebody who's distant. Somebody that's not part of your family, who's distant, and he accepts you as a king. It is this reason that Sfiras HaMalchus creates beings that sense themselves to be separate from godliness. A son can never feel separate from his father. But a regular person out there can feel separate from the king, and nevertheless accepts God, accepts the king as their king. That's real concept. That's the real concept of kingship. Ein melech b'lo am. A king needs a nation. A king needs strangers, so to say. The Eibishter needs, so to say, kaviyachos, in the same analogy, God needs to have strangers. Who are the strangers to God? Everything is a stranger to God, but for surely humanity. So too, these distinct and separate created beings should, by dint in their own spiritual service, nullify themselves to God's will. And that's why we accept the kingship of God. That's the whole concept of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, is accept ourselves, the melech, that the Eibush is a melech. So even though we feel that we're our own melech, we all come from the attribute of Malchus, so we feel we're a melech. We feel our own identity. We're our own king. We're our own power. We're our own person. So, and that's because we come from the attribute of kingship. So therefore we feel like we're kings. And that's why we have to break ourselves. We have to nullify ourselves to the real king. Melech Malchei HaMelachim, the king of all kings. Who's the king of all kings? I'm a king, and I nullify myself to the king of kings. So that's what we have learned in a very beautiful way. So now the Alter Rebbe continues. However, it's known any yesh or entity that its own eyes is only separate from godliness, comes into being principally through Sfiras HaMalchus, comes into through the attribute of kingship of the world of Atzilus, which becomes atik to the world of creation. Now we always know that atik is the crown. So we know that Malchus is the last of the previous world, and it becomes the crown of the next world. So atik is an element of the light, tainug, which is in the most core of Ratzah and will. Thus Malchus of Atzilus becomes the delight, and will that propel the world of Bria into being. For it's Malchus that is able to project a sense of pleasure in created creatures that perceive themselves to be separate entities, since only thus can sovereignty result. It's a very deep concept. So only Malchus, which is a king, understands that another person wants to be a king. Malchus comprehends that everybody wants to be a king. Everybody wants to have his own identity. Only Malchus, which Malchus is kingship, since he has kingship, understands why other entities want to be a king. So they see the Tainug, Malchus, the attribute of kingship, sees the delight in this concept. And therefore, he creates the next reality. He gives the capability for another reality because he sees the beauty in it. For there's no king without a nation. So the analogy of a king is the king who is able to rule only over subjects who are distant from him was explained above. In that analogy, they're corresponding to the created beings of the world of Bria, which are distant from godliness, unlike being the world of Atzilus, the world of emanation, which are close to God. That's why it's called Atzilus. Atzilus means etzloi. They cleave to God. It is thus that creative world of Bria, that the divine attribute of Malchus sovereignty relates to. Also, the multitude and diversity of creatures. Through the paradoxically, they are created by the power of one absolute encompassing insight. This comes to the multitude of letters, Malchus, which comes out of the attribute of Malchus. And that's why the attribute of Malchus is also called Dibur, speech. It's the mouth, Pi Hashem, the mouth of God. As is written, as it says, from the word of God were the heavens made. And by the breath of his mouth, all the hosts. And that's why they have the 5 organs in a human being, and so too in spirituality. There's 5 organs of the mouth. There are 5 organs of supernal speech, corresponding to the 5 physical organs of speech. Are the 5 gevures of Nukva, are the 5 severities of Malchus, the female element of Malchus, of kingship. Hey gevures. Now, so we know the concept of 5 gevuras, because the automatic gevura over here is a contraction. That's the 5 physical organs of speech that they take the breath and they conform it. They box it so that it comes out the letters of the words. Thank God. Yeah, that's a positive aspect of gevura. So it gives the breath has no form, and then the 5 concepts of the mouth create this concept of speech. And therefore, Malchus is called the world of revealed world. Because only in the attribute of Malchus is revealed the power of infinity. To create something out of nothing. It creates something out of nothing without the connection. So without the connection of the cause and effect. So Malchus has the capability to create something totally new. To create something totally new. The progression of Il B'Alul is the created beings, exists among all created beings as well. The creation of Yesh Ma'ayin in the hands of Ein Sof alone. And it is Malchus, that makes this power manifest. So the Eibishter comes down to Malchus, so to say. That's why Malchus is the vessel for the infinite light to be able to create the next world. So Malchus Atzilus creates the world of Bria, the world of creation, which starts the whole creation. And from then, Malchus of Bria creates the world of formation. And Malchus the Bria, the Tzira, creates the world of Malchus Atzilus, the actual world. But the first 9 spheres that precede Malchus, they all are cause and effect. So from Chachma to Malchus, Chachma, Bina, Das, Net, Gvura, Nechesed, Gvura, Tfera, Netzach, Yesod, they are all a cause and effect. But Malchus is a whole new reality. And that's why even though Malchus is the lowest, as we say, not Schloss, say the beginning is rooted in the end. So the real essence of everything is rooted in Malchus, and that's why it's called Malchus. So Malchus is the lowest, and it's called kingship. Kingship should be the highest, but here it's the lowest, because in this kingship is really revealed the true essence of the whole concept. And it has a greater power than even the upper levels. So while the infinite Ein Sof is vested in Chachma alone, Chachma derives from Ein Sof in a matter that resembles the version of Yesh Mi'ayin, as it's known. The verse says Chachma derives from Ayin. The Ein Sof vested in Chachma, and therefore the Ein Sof light illuminates other spheres as well. So therefore, where does Chachma rest? And this to mean the statement in Sefer Yitzir and Kabbalah, rendering the 10 spheres, their beginning is wedged in their end. So the scheme of the spheres, the very beginning, signifies a level transcends even the head. So to be found in the culmination of the series of even greater extent of the head. So the sphere of Chachma, it variously termed Rosh, that's Sfiras Chachma, Rosh Hashanah, the first Reishis. Reishis Chachma is usually understood to mean the beginning of wisdom, but also can mean Chachma is first. Malchus is the last of the Sfiras. Sfiras of Kesed, which transcends the Sfira Chachma, is termed the beginning. Reishis Chachma, the beginning of Chachma. This beginning then is called Kesed, is wedged and even more be found in the end in Malchus than in the Sfira even of Chachma. Reishis Chachma, the beginning of Chachma, which is the crown, which is the Ratzing, the true will, the true purpose of Chachma is found in Sfira Malchus, in the attribute of kingship. For the Kesed, that's Kesed, that's the crown of the king, goes on top of the Chachma of a king's head, is the mediator between the infinite emanator and the finite emanated beings. And the lowest level in Sof is comprised in it. Even in intermediaries, such as in our case, the Sfira of Kesed, must incorporate at least some aspect of both levels it seeks to bridge. Thus, the aspect of the infinite light contained in Kesed is the lowest degree of Ein Sof. This level is the beginning, the level of Ein Sof that is wedged in the Sfira of Malchus. For as mentioned earlier, Malchus that reveals the power of Ein Sof to create Yesh Mayin is all comes from Kesed. So not Shlosim B'Seifon, the beginning is wedged in the end, is Kesed, the Ratzai, true will of God, of all the creation of the Sfirot, is wedged in the end in the attribute of Malchus. In the concept of Malchus, which is kingship, which is the aspect of a Yesh, the creation of a Yesh Mi'ayin. That was the real Ratzon of God, is to have something that has its own identity and at the same time has the capability of humility and bittul. This is such beautiful stuff. And that's why this attribute is called a crown. It's called Kesed Malchus, the crown of sovereignty. As stated in the introduction of passage in Tikkun Zoya, which begins in Pasach Eliyahu, supernal Kesed is Kesed of Malchus. So here we say Kesed is higher than wisdom, but it's called Kesed Malchus, the crown of the king. So it's the crown of the lowest level. It doesn't say the crown of wisdom, it's the crown of a melech, because the beginning is wedged in the end. So even though the crown is on top of the head, which is Chachma, but it's really the crown of the king, which is Malchus, which is kingship. And that's where it's all wedged in. And that's where the melech meets the yam. Ein melech b'lo yam. That's where the melech, which is the lowest attribute, needs the am, needs the nation, needs the next level. or a crown is only for a king. The prime function of Sfiras HaKesed is to draw down the infinite, and it's like contained within it to the level of Malchus. Also, Kesed is called Keser Malchus because its final level of Ein Sof is Malchus of Ein Sof infinity. Thus, Kesed possesses the quality of Malchus. Malchus is the lowest level of Ein Sof. Consequently, Malchus of the world of Atzilus too is called Keter. When the spheres are considered to ascend the order, so Malchus now becomes the Keser of the next world. This especially so since through Malchus the creation of souls take place, enabling them to be a yesh and separate entities in the way. Now you understand why every person feels like a melech, why every soul feels like a king. Because the souls are created in the world of Bria, and they're all created from Malchus in the world of Atzilus. And they all feel like kings. We are all kings and queens. Why? Because we all come from Sfiras HaMalchus, which gives us that quality. We're talking about kingship in a positive way, not a negative way. That's why, God forbid, it can become a negative way if you have ego. But a real king has bittul. A real king knows where he comes from. And he only becomes a king because of the lower level, because of a nation, and because God made him a king. Nika b'shem later, thus derive the souls of Malchus, is termed later birth. A process that requires intervention of a higher power emanating from Ein Sof, by the splitting of the sea, which is stated in the Zohar, depends on Atik. So it depends on Ein Sof coming into Malchus to be able to create another world. Malchus has no power itself. That's why Malchus is called no power itself. Malchus, its only power is from the lower and from the higher. That's only the power of Malchus. There's no king without a nation. So he needs to lower and he needs to higher. And that's why Keser is the intermediary. He needs to higher and needs to lower. If he doesn't have either one, he's nothing. And he knows that. Malchus knows that. Kingship knows that. So Atik is related to Netak, implies the removal and separation of the created world, is the inner, higher level of Keser, whose outer, lower levels turn Arich. The Atik is the final degree of Ein Sof. Arich is the source, rooted, emanated beings. There's two entities. Atik and Arich is the concept of Keser. This is all Kabbalistic words. So you have what we mentioned before, the two bridge, the Atik, which is separated and connected to something higher. Arich, the way it comes down into something that is lower. So Kabbalah teaches that the birth of a soul is comparable to the splitting of the sea, and like it requires the power and Sof found in Atik, in the higher level. The Alter Rebbe now explains that this infinite power is needed not only for the birth of the soul, but for their gestation as well. Also, the growth of the soul throughout the 7 months. From the union of Shmini Atzeres and the birth on the 7th day of Pesach. Taught in Kabbalah, the union that conceives souls takes place on Shmini Atzeres, while the birth of the souls takes place on the 7th day of Pesach at the time of the crossing of the sea. So, this is again a Kabbalistic concept. We're coming to Shmini Atzeres soon, which is the last day, the 8th day of Sukkot. And there is the creation of the souls, and there and ultimately comes out in the 7th on the 7th day of Pesach, Tiras Yamsuf. So 7 months. 7 months later, you have the creation of the soul. This whole Kabbalistic concept which happens on the 7th day of Pesach, which is the day of the crossing of the sea. Resembles the growth of Zah Nukva. The spirit of Zah is the 6 attributes, and Malchus of Atzilus that are formerly concealed in the womb of Imi Allah, the supernal mother, which is Bina, in the innermost degree of Bina of Atzilus. This takes place by the means of the supernal iris of mother. The supernal mother, Imila, well, the Maila, the Sefer reaches up to the infinity. Which ultimately goes through 9 or 7 months of pregnancy. The Dosha Zohar Nukva of Atzilus delivered from Bina of Atzilus, known as Imila, the supernal mother. So do the souls gestate in Malchus, which is known as Imatata, the nether mother, since Malchus incorporates itself in the supernal iris of Ein Sof. So this is all. That's why ultimately it comes down into the world that these are 7 months or 9 months pregnancy in a worldly mother. So just like it happens in this world between 7 and 9 months that a child is created, so too it happens in the upper worlds that the creation of souls happens within 7 months from Shmini Atzeres until Shvi Shal Pesach. That's a minimum 7 months. Also, the very essence of the root is seminal drop, which Malchus receives, and through which she impregnated by Zeh Amped rise from Moichen of Abba and Ima. That all comes from Chochmah and Bina of the world of Atzilus, and they go in ultimately into Malchus, which Malchus is feminine, and they create the souls in the world of Bria. They create souls. Where does the supernal mother and father, Chochmah and Bina of the world of Atzilus, get their power? They get it from Keser, from the aspect of the crown which is above them. And ultimately from infinity. But there it's all hidden until it comes into Malchus. And there it comes revealed where in the world of Bria. Hence, by means of the gestation and birth, this true revelation of the infinity in the world of creation, of the world of souls and angels, in the world of Bria, in the world of creation. So not only is the infinite power Ein Sof drawn down through Malchus to bring about a Yesh, in addition, Ein Sof light is actually revealed by the means of this gestation and birth of souls. This is where we see in the birth of souls, in the birth of a Yesh, in the creation of Olam HaBria, which is much more of a Yesh, much more of something than the world of emanation, the world of Atzilus. There is where we see the greatness of God. There is where we see not only the greatness of creation, but the greatness of Ein Sof that created something that's a Yesh, that has its own identity. By virtue of this role, Malchus is turned Imat Alma the Galia, the world of revelation. In addition to its role in drawing down the power of godliness in a concealed manner within creation. Oh, that completes the Tanya of the day. Very powerful stuff. Extremely powerful stuff. Today is the 8th day of the month, which starts on chapter 44, 45, 46, 47, 48. So 45 to 48, and also the 3 chapters of the day are 109, 110, and 111. My friends, tonight at 8 o'clock, you can come to a community kaparot at 8 p.m. at Chabad outside in the parking lot. There's going to be 1 rooster for all men, 1 hen for all women. Come tonight. If you're not going to a personal kaparas, come tonight at least, where you can do kaparot. And the tradition of doing kaparot with a chicken. Come tonight. We don't shech the chicken in the parking lot. Don't worry. And come tonight at 8 p.m. Chabad in the outside in the parking lot at 8 p.m. tonight. Have a wonderful and beautiful, happy and healthy day. And we'll We'll see you tonight at 8 p.m.